Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 87 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. This week, we're going to be continuing on last week's adventure, which is building up Amiga 2000s with spare parts that I have. I have enough parts to build two of them. We're going to concentrate on one at a time, I think. A couple of things have happened since last week's episode, and here's a link to it for those of you who haven't seen it. Number one, I was looking at the power supplies that came with my two units, and I realized one of them was a third-party Bigfoot power supply. Now, this came out in the late 80s. I remember reading about them. They were a couple $100, I think $250 or something like that. It was crazy. Maybe I'm wrong. But these are much higher powered Amiga power supplies. The original model was 200 watts. The Bigfoots are 300 watts. So in theory, I should be able to load this little guy up and it should be able to handle anything we throw at it. So I'm excited about that. So here in a minute, we're going to test the voltages and make sure all the voltages come through just fine. The second thing was I had several people in the comments last week comment on my A2065 Ethernet card. Now, I mentioned on there that I was going to use a flip box because while I do have a couple of these 2065s, they have either the Ethernet or the AUI adapter here, right here. And when I was looking a couple of years ago at converters, I was looking at the BNC, the coaxial type converters. They were like 80 to 100 bucks used on eBay. And I'm like, you know what? I'll find another way to do it. So I had a couple of people tell me and give me the part numbers of the AUI adapters. And I found one. This is a Centercom 210TS. It's made by Cisco, and we all know Cisco. They own Linksys, so we probably have some of their products in our house. This is an adapter, AUI to Ethernet. It's like 30 bucks, something like that, $25, $30. And in theory, I should be able to just finagle those two together. And now my A2065 will have actual 10 base T Ethernet, which is plenty for this. You don't need 100 base T for this kind of stuff. So I'm excited, and thank you everyone. There's like 3 or 4 of you in the comments that mentioned this, and thank you guys so much. You're the best. I also settled on one of the two cases. This is the 2000 HD case. I cleaned it up with a combination of soap and water and one of the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser sponges. They're the slightly abrasive white sponges you can get, and they just do wonders on things like this. There's no need to retrobrite it. I don't see any need at all to retrobrite it. But the case itself came out looking just beautifully. Now I still have a little bit of work to do on the keyboard. I have not cleaned the keyboard yet. I know a lot of people pop out the keys individually and clean them in soap and water. I take a toothbrush and I take some cleaner and I just scrub them, and that seems to do pretty good. And then I'll use the Magic Eraser to get off some of this stuck on tape on here and just generally clean the keyboard up so it'll look about a cajillion times better. But let's jump right in and take a look at this power supply and make sure she's putting out the proper voltages before we start putting this kit together. Now, she's a pretty little power supply here. The guts are quite nice. I powered it up already outside of the case. It spins up just fine, and it's actually fairly quiet, much quieter than my Amiga 2000 I use for my video toaster, so I'm very pleased about that. Now, let's talk about the pinouts so we can test this little guy out. Now, the Amiga 2000 has its own fairly unique header, and the pins are labeled 1 through 14. 1 starts with the red ones here. Now, if your power supply is different, you can always tell where number 1 starts because pin number 10 is missing. See how that doesn't have a little wire in there? So you know that that's going to be 14, so that's going to be 1. So we can count 1 through 14. Now, let's take a look at what we want. Pins 1 and 2 should be 5 volt, and 3 and 4 should be 5 volts. All 4 of these red ones should register 5 volts. 5, 6, 7, and 8 should all be ground. 9, which is yellow, should be 12 volt. 10, that's called the key, that's to lock it in place. 11 is negative 12 volts. Pin number 12 is plus 5 volts. 13 is the minus 5 volts. And then pin 14 is the fairly unique tick that I talked about last episode, where it sends out some kind of little oscillating signal that the Amiga latches onto. And this power supply has it. So let's take a look at these voltage. Now I've got my nice fluke here that I'm using to measure everything. This is a great one. So I'm just going to use the power supply chassis over here, the metal chassis, as ground, and we're going to check these voltages. Plus 5 volts there, plus 5 volts. Yep, 5 volts, 5 volts. Nothing, ground, 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 ground. This should be 12 volts. We're getting 11.14, which is not horrible, but not exactly where I'd want it to be. Then nothing on 10 because it's blank. We've got minus 10.7. That's again not perfect, but then again it's not under load. And then we've got number 12 plus 5 user. I got nothing there. Pin 13, I'm not getting minus 5 volts. Pin 14, nothing. So it's interesting because pin 13 is not showing minus 5 volts DC, which is very, very interesting. Let's check the original Amiga 2000 power supply and see what we get out of that. So for laughs, I tried the second power supply that came. This would have come with my unit from eBay that was in such bad shape. I tested out that power supply. I don't even get anything out of this at all. Now I think that these should power up just fine because they're sort of like AT power supplies, even when they're not under load, not connected. This one I don't get any fan spin or anything, so I have to take this apart, see what the problem is, and this will be an excellent candidate for swapping out with another power supply. The only problem I found on my Bigfoot power supply is the negative 5 volt line was not showing up, but it's possible that it won't show up until there's some kind of load. I'll have to look and see, but everything else checks out, within tolerances. So we're going to try it out, see what happens. Now when we're looking at the case here, the actual bottom part of the case, there's this component that is very important. It has a plastic sheet on it that keeps the entire thing from shorting out. So if you're playing around with yours, cleaning yours, don't forget this plastic sheet or you're going to have nothing but problems. It only fits in here one way. Now the motherboard's only going to fit in one way, of course, and that is with the back pieces towards the back and the front pieces towards the front. How's that getting technical? Now you actually want to put the motherboard into the little protective case first, so then it will slide right in. So let's go ahead and get that put in here. Put the back in first, and then pry the front out a little bit and slide her right in. Like butter. So now we have the bottom of the motherboard put into place. This should now just slide right into the case. Let's take a look. So what I'm finding is you want to put the back connectors in first so they line up. And if you don't, it's a real struggle to get everything in and lined up properly. There we go. Once they are in, you're going to notice that all of the little holes line up for your screws. Now it is a bit more of a challenge than I expected to get that motherboard back in. You really have to kind of tweak it and make sure everything slides in the back okay before it fits in there. But once it's in, it's in. Now we're going to get the motherboard screwed in there. I've had this box of screws, probably it's been around since maybe 1995 is when I first saw it at the computer store I used to work at and ended up buying. Looking for a good screw, we keep loose nuts in a small box. I don't know who put that on there years ago, but it's been on there for like 25 years. I think it was my old pal Gus Craig who used to work for me. But just an assortment of PC screws of all shapes and sizes. And these little guys seem to hold the motherboard down just fine. I'll get the exact size and put it in the description, but they're pretty standard a narrow thread motherboard screw. So the motherboard's in there nice and tight. We've got just several screw holes. There's probably a good 8 of them or so. You'll notice a couple things are missing. One of them is the ROM, and the other one is an Agnes chip. Now this board here came with a nice fat Agnes, which I have in this little package right here. One of these is a 512K Agnes, and one of them is the 1 meg Agnes. Guess which one I'm going to use? Yep, the 1 meg Agnes. And in place of a ROM, I'm going to use the Romulator, which you can find a review of right there in the corner. It's like a little Star Trek ship. That's why they call it the Romulator. Pew, pew, pew. Okay, I'm done playing. And well, I'll get the Romulator put in here. Refer to the video on how to install it, but I will show you where you have to make the physical electrical connection in here to grab the reset line. So let's take a look at where we're at here. We have the Agnes plugged in the correct way. We've got the Romulator plugged in. And remember, there's on an Amiga 500 and 2000, the 2 little pins at the very end will be overhanging here. Now you see there's not much clearance over the Agnes chip here. If I were to have a Mega chip or something like that, I'd have to get a little ROM tower to plug in there to extend this up so it fits over it. But on a regular Agnes, it works just fine. Now I've grabbed the reset line from R201 right here on a 6.2 board. That's where the best place for it to go. I do understand on other varieties of boards this might not be in existence, so some people grab onto a reset line on the 68,000 CPU and some people latch onto Gary, whichever way works for you. Now I've temporarily got my power supply just running through here because before I put everything together I want to see if she boots. So in theory, this should be coming up with a nice Romulator screen here. So we see our Romulator initializing, and look at that. Romulator screen. Now it'll default to the Amiga OS Kickstart 1 or 3.1 ROM, I think. See if she comes out. Come on, little beauty. Look at that. Like a charmed voice. Not too shabby. So we are good to go at putting the rest of this back together. So this has been the most difficult thing about this adventure so far, is finding a screw that fits in here. It's not the same screw that fits in the standard Amiga 2000 power supply, and I don't seem to have them. I found literally 2 of them in my bin of screws. They're a little thinner than a normal like motherboard screw with a little bit thicker thread to them, and these fit perfectly, and I literally can find 2 of them in my hundreds and hundreds of screws. So I'll make a trip to the hardware store, see if I can find some more that fit, but we'll just get by with what we have for right now. Fitting in the power supply itself is a bit of fun. It also comes with a drive tray right here, of course, and there's 2 screws right on the back that it has to line up with, that it's going to lock it in place, and then 2 screws in the front. So you're going to want to carefully line everything up and set it on its little tray to make sure all the little screws line up. And in the front right here, there's a little tab that slots right down into there. So you put that in, slot that in first, and then the power supply rests right here. Now, we want to make sure that everything we need to do underneath this power supply is done before we bolt it down, because it's kind of a pain to get out, especially once you put the disc trays in and everything like that. It can get kind of inconvenient taking this in and out. Here you see we have 2 screws right in the front here that lock the tray in place, and a third one right here. Now these are also probably slightly odd shaped screws. Luckily I have them from the original case. I'm sure most of these are still available, but there are times that Commodore was known to use kind of funky sized screws to get things installed, and that made it a little challenging to locate the replacement parts. Then we've got 1 screw here, 1 screw here, 1 screw here, and 1 screw here in the back that I'm going to get this all bolted down. So I'll take care of that. And I just mentioned the oddity of screws with Commodore equipment. Now we've got 2 screws that fit up here into the Bigfoot power supply. I was able to find 2 screws that fit perfect. These 2 bottom screws, can't find a single one that fits. They're all just slightly too small. So I'll have to dig through my stash, see if I can find some bigger ones, the appropriate ones to go here, or I'll just again go up to Ace Hardware and find the right size. But this power supply is not going anyplace without those 2 screws, so we'll be okay for the time being. Up next we have the drive tray, which is another non-standard Commodore part, but hey, what are you gonna do? It's got these tabs here that slide into these holes on each side. So we'll just slip them in that one and then bend it over just a touch, slip it in there. Now we have a place to mount both of our GoTek drive and our other drive, which is going to be the SD drive. 5 1/4 bay, not quite sure what we'll do with that. And of course, these have the mounting holes for some of the hard drives and such. So you may want to mount these before you actually physically screw this into the side of the tray here. You may want to mount your equipment first. Let's go ahead and do that with the GoTek drive. Now you'll see with the GoTek drive that has 4 mounting holes, 3 mounting holes on the bottom. 1, 2, 3. And it will line up with those mounting holes, sorry, 1, 2, 3 on this tray. Just like so. So we should be able to go underneath and screw the GoTek right into the drive bay without any problem. I'm going to go ahead and find some self-tapping screws and get that screwed in. A couple little screws like this should work just fine for the GoTek. The little points in the end will dig right into the plastic of the GoTek mount, and it'll mount right up in there, no problem at all. Now the SCSI to SD device right here with the mounting kit that I have on here, it's going to tend to go back further in the case. If you can see right here and right here, there's some mounting holes that line right up with these little mounting tabs, and you can go back and forth. Now this does not need to be sticking out the front of the case, although we could probably jury rig it. Yeah, we could do it to stick out in the front of the case too if we wanted to, by lining up these holes right here. And I may just try it both ways, both recessed a little. Now if it's recessed, I could in theory put the cover on it, the front cover, click it in place, and you won't even be able to see the SCSI to SD until I take that off if I want to change the interface cards. If I mount it further ahead here, like so, then I'll have instant access to the cards, but I'll also see the tray. We'll try it this way and see how it looks. Now we have both the GoTek and the SCSI to SD mounted in here. Now I'm not worried about mounting this in advance. I do have to program it, but it does have a USB connector here. I can just take my laptop right up to my Amiga 2000, plug it in, and program it without any problem at all. Now we're going to mount this right in here. We'll line up our little tabs. There. That fits nice and snug. Both devices nice and snug in there. And we have a bay available. I do have a SCSI CD-ROM that I'm thinking I might put in here too. We'll see how it goes. And we'll have plenty of room for that. Now something must be horribly and terribly wrong here, because these used an absolutely bog standard size screw, of which I have a million, which makes it the first time on this Amiga 2000 build that in my case of 8,000 different kinds of screws, I found easily a couple of them that work just perfectly. So thanks, Commodore, appreciate that. This also can elevate a little bit. It has two little screw holes here. So if your device is a little too low, we can bring it up a centimeter or two by raising this tray here. There is also a chance I may have to use some standoffs or something to get a little more spacing to get everything even and spaced properly. We're going to try it without the standoffs and see where we need to go. Let's go ahead and get this power plugged in here. Make sure she still works. The power supply is keyed, but keep in mind that it is a pain in the butt to get off, a big time pain to get the power connector off, because it snaps into place so tightly. So once you get it in there, you know, try to only have to do it like 1 or 2 times, because you don't want to make this plastic weak and make the connector weak. Now, of course, my devices will need power. You generally don't need power for the SCSI to SD. It usually gets its power right from the SCSI cable, and you'll learn that when you watch my video, which I will link up here, all about the SCSI to SD. But in case your SCSI adapter does not provide power through the cable, it does have a standard Molex connector. Your GoTek, that is going to require power, so we are going to hook up one of the little power adapters, ta-da, right to there. And of course, because reasons, the power connectors are too short to reach the GoTek. Look at that, they don't even stretch over there. Isn't that crazy? Now, if I mounted the floppy here, they would reach just fine. So is that what I'm going to do, is undo these and swap them left and right so we can plug it straight in? Nay, nay. I'm to go find one of my adapters that adapts the larger Molex connector into the mini connector, and that will give me all the distance I need. And here's my little adapter. And see, we have plenty of length here. We'll just jumper those together, ta-da, and I have plenty of space. Now, I probably should just swap the positions to make fewer cables in here, but it never hurts to have a couple of extra connectors anyways. And I use far more of these small connectors than I do these large ones. The large ones, really the only purpose I'd have for these in modern times is for hooking up a CD-ROM, and I've got 2 free, so we're good. So right now, we have the floppy drive cable connected to the GoTek. That's all connected up, got the power connected. I put on Amiga OS 3.1 ADF files and 3.14 ADF files on this little flash drive right here. So in theory, it should boot right up to Amiga OS 3.1 on floppy. Let's see what happens. Give her some power. We come up to our Romulator screen. We'll just let it boot with a standard Amiga OS 3.1 ROM. And Amiga OS Workbench is flashing away on the GoTek here. Now it's nice on an Amiga 2000 because you can see the screen without any issue at all right from the front of the case. And looky what we have here. We have Workbench 3.1 starting up just beautifully from our Amiga 2000. I'd say that's a pretty good accomplishment. But are we done? Absolutely not. We got some more goodies to install inside of here, because who wants just a boring old Amiga 2000? Let's put some cards in here. And just like every single occurrence of installing zip RAM, it all went in perfectly straight, no bent pins at all, no frustration, no taking tweezers and trying to straighten out a little stinking pin. Of course it went perfectly. Trust me. Just don't look at this pile of bent Zimp RAM over here. I don't know where that came from. Let's go ahead and get this installed in the machine. Let's take a look at where we're going to put it. We've got several nice sockets here for the Zorro II. Of course, we don't want to put it in any of these because those are going to be reserved for the bridge board. And that leaves these three. And I think because it has a cable on it, I'm going to put it closest over here. The things like the 2065 card don't have cables on them, so they'll fit a little nicer. So she's going to go right in there. The Zorro card is plugged in. We've got our 8 megs of RAM here. I've got the SCSI cable connected. Now, of course, I have nothing in here, nor do I have anything configured for this yet. So it won't show up as a drive. I don't even know if it'll boot when there's nothing plugged in there, but we shall see. I really want to see if it's recognized by the system. Let's power her on. We get our Romulator. Now I'm going to do the 2-finger salute and theoretically boot into our little menu here. Expansion board diagnostics. Oh, lovely. Number one thing that comes up is defective. Huh. Lovely. Well, I double-checked everything with that Octagon card, Octagon SCSI with 8 megs. The RAM seems to be installed okay. All the jumper settings were fine, and it still shows up as defective. So it really may be bad. There could be something wrong with that. I'll have to look into that. So in the meantime, plan B is this Commodore A2091 card, which is actually pretty good. It's only got 2 megabytes of RAM instead of 8, but it does have nice, reasonably fast SCSI. And this has worked fine on a couple of different machines, so we're going to get this installed instead. Okay, she's all plugged in. We're powered up. We're going to try to boot to Workbench 3.1, and we will see if we see our memory and possibly see our SCSI drives. This is exciting. Let's see what we got here, Amiga. So we've learned a valuable lesson. If we have nothing in the SCSI to SD, we have no card, it's not configured, and we have the cable plugged in, she doesn't want to boot. It just hangs there. It might have eventually started booting to floppy, but it was probably searching for the SCSI drive. And so I just unplugged it, rebooted, came up nicely. Now let's see if it recognizes the memory. Look at that. 1 megabyte of chip RAM, 2 megabytes of fast RAM. Perfectly good. Now let's see if it sees the SCSI controller. I don't know if the program will be here or if it'll be on another disk. Show config is on the extras disk of 3.1. Let's go ahead and pop in here and see what we got. Oh, of course you wanted the other disk. Flip back to Workbench. All right, very, very nice. We see our 2 megabytes of RAM and we see our SCSI controller. We are good to go. Now, here's a nod to my good friend Eric from Amigalove. You'll see his logo right across there. And look, there's his smiling face too. We're booting with the Romulator to Kickstart ROM 1.0 and Amiga Workbench 1.0. See, it sees the whole 512 kilobytes of memory. It doesn't even see the expanded memory. But yep, this is Workbench 1.0 running straight off the GoTek drive on our new Amiga 2000. Gives us some fun things we can try. Demos. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, the lines demo. How many of us ran this 8,000 times when we first got our Amigas as youngsters? Workbench 1.0, my friends, 1.0. Welcome to the future, my friends. Welcome to the future. And the time it has taken me to do one little effect in my imaging program, we're now booted up to Amiga OS 3.1.4, the very latest in Amiga awesome OS technology. On the same machine, just using the Romulator and a GoTek drive. Pretty cool, huh? So let's take a look at where we're at here. we've got an Amiga 2000 that's booting just fine from the GoTek drive. The Romulator is working absolutely delightfully in here. We've booted from OS 1.0 up to 3.1.4, and so far it boots fine to all the operating systems. I put in the A2065 Ethernet card just before I put the case back on here temporarily. Not 100% satisfied with how the SCSI to SD and how the GoTek look in here. The white color just, doesn't look right. Maybe there's a beige color that matches better that I can have 3D printed. Maybe I can just take these plastics off and find a nice spray paint that's the same color and spray paint them, and it'll look better. Maybe I will recess this SCSI to SD, push it back inside the case like I showed you you could do, and put the little front cover back on here, and then I'll just have to deal about the GoTek. Let me know in the comments below what you think I should do, what direction you think I should go. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to put an operating system on the hard drive here. I'll go ahead and get the SCSI to SD all set up with a nice 4 gig SD drive. We'll get probably Amiga OS 3.1.4 on here, although I may do 2 different cards with 2 operating systems. It might be fun. One with Amiga OS 1.3 full install and one with 3.1.4, and it'll just be a matter of putting in a different SD card and changing the ROM in Romulator to boot to whichever one I want to. It'll be kind of fun. We're also going to get the bridge board working in here and a couple of other goodies, and we're going to have fun with displays and how we're going to display this. Right now it's from a SCART to HDMI adapter that 80% of us use, and it looks absolutely perfect. It's perfectly fine, but there are better ways to do it, and we'll approach those. I would like to thank my absolutely wonderful patrons. You can see this glorious list right here. If you want to help out the show, please drop on by to patreon.com/10mark. Take a look, see if you can help the show out. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. You're the best. Please follow me on Twitter. I'm very active there. That's where you'll find everything that's going on in my little Amiga world in between shows. I'm at Twitter/10mark1. Please like and subscribe. We just hit 4,000 subscribers last week, which is absolutely awesome. And I'm working on an Amiga 4000 Adventures show to celebrate 4,000 subscribers. That should be out in about 2 weeks. Again, comment below. Let me know what you think about the installation so far. Tell me what direction you'd like me to go. I'd love to hear it. But until next time, this is Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out to go format some SD cards.